It's not, adversity in its full sense, but actually it's been tough.
It's applying yourself when you don't want to.
But it's also it's the endorphins, whenever you...
St. Peter's Square holds 200,000 people on the morning of May 18th, 2025, and not one of them is the King of England. A man in a dark suit walks toward the front rows instead, past cardinals in red, past presidents and prime ministers who came to watch Pope Leo XIV lead his first Mass as the first American Pope in history. Cameras find his face and hold on it a second too long because the face they expected belongs to King Charles III. The face they get belongs to his younger brother. Prince Edward, Duke of Edinburgh, takes the King's place in Vatican City that day. No emergency announcement precedes it, no press conference explains it. Buckingham Palace simply confirms it, the way it confirms a garden party or a Tuesday hospital visit. And that quiet is the story. For years, cameras chased the loud version of this family, Prince Andrew and the Epstein connection that would not stay buried. Harry and Meghan boarding a plane out of royal life in 2020.
Catherine, Princess of Wales, disappearing from public view during cancer treatment. Every one of those stories filled front pages for weeks. Edward filled none of them. He stood behind the principal players in photograph after photograph, rarely named, the brother nobody built a headline around. Then the headlines started running out of people to feature. Hi viewers, quick question before we go further. Had you even noticed Prince Edward's name popping up more this year, or did this catch you off guard the way it caught most of Britain off guard? Drop a yes or a no in the comments, because the answer says something about how this family manages its own coverage. By the time Edward stood in for the King in Rome, he was already the most senior working male royal behind only Charles and William, according to royal reporting from earlier that same year. That sentence would have sounded absurd a decade ago. This was the brother who quit Royal Marine training partway through, the one whose television production embarrassed the family on national TV, the one nobody expected to matter. Something shifted. Not overnight, and not with an announcement. King Charles III never held a press conference to explain why his youngest brother kept showing up where kings and heirs usually stand. The change happened the way real power usually moves inside an institution built on centuries of tradition, quietly, one appointment at a time, one empty chair filled at a time. Royal watchers who track this family closely noticed it before casual viewers did. A birthday tribute here, a patronage handed over there, a seat filled in Rome that should have belonged to a king. Stacked together, it looks less like coincidence and more like a pattern. The public saw a quiet prince standing in St. Peter's Square. Inside the machinery of the British monarchy, quiet does not mean powerless. It can mean the opposite. And the reason why starts decades earlier, with a boy nobody thought would matter at all. The stage lights go dark on a June night in 1987, and 23-year-old Prince Edward walks off it into a wall of laughter that isn't friendly. He organised the whole event himself. It's a royal knockout, a celebrity game show built around his own siblings in medieval costumes for charity. Critics tear it apart within hours. Newspapers call it an embarrassment to the crown. Edward walks out of the press conference afterward visibly angry, and the clip runs on British television for years as shorthand for royal misjudgment. The tabloids already have a nickname ready: Prince Brat. 3 years earlier, he had quit Royal Marine Commando training after 5 months of a notoriously brutal course his father and grandfather had both completed without complaint. Prince Philip does not hide his disappointment. The press does not let Edward forget it either.
We're just spending lots of £1 million on doing it.
which was supposed to have a life of 25 years.
This is where most royal stories about Edward would stop. A cautionary tale, the family member who never lived up to the name. But this one keeps going, because Edward does not leave the institution. He builds a career in television production instead, spending over a decade largely out of the royal spotlight, running his own company and learning an industry his family had only ever watched from the outside. Then he folds that experience back into royal life when he becomes a full-time working member of the family in 2002, trading a production office for a diary full of engagements nobody else particularly wanted. There is no dramatic turning point here, no single moment the tabloids can point to and say, this is where it changed. Just years of showing up. Ribbon cuttings, regional visits, the unglamorous, repetitive labour that keeps an institution visible in places London rarely looks. He marries Sophie Rhys-Jones in 1999, and Buckingham Palace announces something unusual at the wedding. In due course, Edward will inherit his father's title, Duke of Edinburgh. Nobody expects that promise to matter for decades. Prince Philip holds the title until his death in 2021, and even then it passes only briefly to Charles, merging into the crown itself the moment Charles becomes king in September 2022. For 6 months, the title of Duke of Edinburgh does not exist anywhere. Then, on March 10, 2023, Edward's 59th birthday, King Charles III revives it and hands it to his younger brother. Sophie becomes Duchess of Edinburgh beside him. Buckingham Palace breaks with 7 decades of tradition in the same announcement. The title will not pass to Edward's children. It exists only for his lifetime, which means the king alone controls what becomes of it next. A courtesy title from a big brother to a little brother. That is how it reads in the headlines that week. That is not how it functions in the years that follow. Buckingham Palace releases a statement on February 5, 2024, and one sentence inside it lands like a door slamming shut. King Charles III has been diagnosed with cancer. Engagements vanish from his diary within hours. State visits get rescheduled. The palace does not name the type of cancer, and speculation fills the gap it leaves open. Weeks later, a second blow lands. Catherine, Princess of Wales, reveals she is also undergoing cancer treatment following planned surgery that January. 2 of the most visible working royals in Britain vanish from public duties in the same season. Every institution built on visibility has a nightmare scenario. This is the monarchies. King Charles came to the throne already planning for a version of this exact problem. Long before he became king, he spoke openly about wanting a slimmed-down monarchy, fewer working royals, tighter costs, a leaner institution built for a country less patient with pageantry. Fewer working royals sounds efficient on paper. In practice, it means fewer people available when 2 of the busiest suddenly cannot work. Parliament had already quietly prepared for a gap like this. At the end of 2022, lawmakers fast-tracked a change to the Regency Act 1937, expanding the list of councillors of state, the small group legally permitted to carry out royal duties on the monarch's behalf when he cannot. Before that update, the law recognised only the next 4 adults in line to the throne, several of whom, including Prince Harry and Prince Andrew, were no longer active in royal life. Adding Edward and his sister, Princess Anne, to that list was a legislative fix, passed with almost no attention, for a crisis nobody could yet see coming. 2 years later, that fix stopped being theoretical. a law drafted for an abstract worst-case scenario, suddenly described the real condition of the British monarchy. A king undergoing treatment, a Prince of Wales who could not clone himself to cover every gap, and a small, legally defined shortlist of people permitted to stand in for the king himself. As of 2024, that shortlist includes Edward. Queen Camilla steps further into public view during this stretch, shouldering engagements and shielding her husband's recovery from constant scrutiny. Her presence matters, but the Regency Act change is about something narrower, a legal power to act, not simply a public face. William, Prince of Wales, spends the early months of 2024 balancing his father's illness, his wife's treatment, and his own young family. George, Charlotte, and Louis, the next generation, the entire institution is quietly being rebuilt around. He cannot be everywhere. Charles cannot either. Someone has to be. Royal commentators covering that period keep returning to the same word to describe what happens next: reliable. Not exciting, not headline-grabbing, reliable. The one quality an institution values most when its two biggest names go quiet at the same time. The chessboard was never only about who gets the crown someday. It was about who keeps the machinery running while the king is in a hospital bed and the future king is not yet ready to run it alone. That question already has an answer. It is just not the one anyone expected. Buckingham Palace releases a second statement on October 30th, 2025, and this one is aimed at a member of the family, not an illness. The King, it says, has initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles and honours of Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew, going forward, will be known as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. His lease on Royal Lodge, the mansion that had legally protected his right to stay there, is formally revoked. The removal becomes official days later, in November. By February 2026, he has been evicted from the property entirely and moved into smaller accommodation on the Sandringham estate, reportedly paid for by his own brother. This is not a courtroom verdict. No judge signs it, no jury hears it. King Charles III uses something older than any modern statute: royal prerogative, the monarch's personal authority to grant or remove styles and titles at will. It is one of the few tools left in the British Constitution that still lets a single person act almost entirely alone. But prerogative has limits, and this is where the legal picture gets more complicated than most headlines let on. Stripping Andrew of Prince and His Royal Highness does not remove him from the line of succession. That would require an Act of Parliament, according to constitutional researchers who have studied the question directly. A far slower, far more public process than a single palace statement. As of early 2026, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, formally disgraced, evicted and arrested that February on suspicion of misconduct in public office, technically remains 8th in line to the throne. Two different kinds of power sit side by side here, and the contrast is the entire point. One is fast, quiet, and entirely within the king's personal control. The power to strip a title overnight with a single statement. The other is slow, public, and requires the consent of Parliament itself, the power to change who could, in theory, one day wear the crown. Royal legal and communications teams spend far more time on the first kind of power than the public ever sees, managing statements, reviewing language, timing announcements to control damage rather than provoke more of it. That is the real work behind every "lawyers break silence" headline that circulates whenever a crisis hits this family. Not dramatic courtroom declarations, but careful, unglamorous language written to survive scrutiny from every direction at once. The real legal battle protecting this institution rarely happens where the cameras are pointed. It happens in the quiet, technical distance between what a king can do alone overnight and what an entire parliament has to agree to first. A financial report lands on June 25, 2026, and buried inside pages of accounting language sits a number big enough to make headlines on its own: £132.1 million. That is the sovereign grant for the 2025-26 financial year, the annual payment British taxpayers give the monarchy to fund official duties and the upkeep of royal palaces. It is a jump of £45.8 million from the year before, a rise of 53%, the first increase since 2021. Campaign groups call the number scandalous. One activist tells reporters the money should be falling, not climbing, while the government struggles to fund schools and hospitals. Here is the detail most coverage buries beneath the outrage. The money is not appearing from nowhere, and it is not taxpayers writing a bigger cheque out of generosity. The sovereign grant is legally tied to the profits of the Crown Estate, a property portfolio the monarch does not personally own, but which funds the institution under a formula set by Parliament. And the Crown Estate's profits surged for one specific reason: record income from offshore wind farms operating in British waters. Leases signed years earlier finally paying out at scale. Offshore money moving onshore into a palace undergoing a decade-long renovation few taxpayers will ever see the inside of. The King and Queen, once that renovation finishes, will not even make Buckingham Palace their personal residence, according to the same official report. The building stays a working institution, not a home, which makes the entire cost harder to frame as personal extravagance. The number climbs again in 2026 to 27 to £137.9 million, funding the final stretch of that renovation. Then, starting in 2027 to 28, it is scheduled to fall, down to roughly £99.9 million, under new legislation Parliament intends to introduce, specifically to prevent what one government review calls inappropriately high funding in the future. The rise was planned, so was the fall. Almost nothing about royal finance happens by accident. It happens on formulas fixed years in advance, quietly, long before the public ever sees the figure attached to it. This is the part the drama headlines miss completely. Andrew's scandal filled front pages for months. Charles's illness filled them for weeks. A £45.8 million jump in royal funding, tied to profits from wind turbines standing in the ocean, barely held the public's attention for a single news cycle. Money moves this institution more than any individual member of it ever could. Trust is what keeps that money moving without triggering a political fight loud enough to shut it down. That is the real chessboard King Charles III is playing on. Not who gets which title, but who can be trusted to keep public confidence high enough that Parliament keeps approving the number every 5 years without a fight. A steady, unglamorous brother who shows up, says little, and never becomes a headline is worth more to that mission than anyone in this family currently lets on. Everyone was watching the money disappear into headlines about scandal. Almost nobody was watching what that money actually depends on to keep flowing. A black SUV pulls through the gates of Highgrove House on July 10th, 2026, and inside it sits a family King Charles III has not seen together in 4 years. Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, steps out first. Behind her, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet climb into the Gloucestershire air, on British soil for the first time since 2022. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, follows last.
Do you think about that a lot, both of you? You particularly, Kate, obviously.
Well, obviously it'd be
Queen Camilla is already inside, waiting beside the King. Buckingham Palace confirms the visit took place. It releases no photographs, no transcript, no account of what gets said inside those walls for the better part of an afternoon. Reports on the meeting describe it as emotional. Harry had said months earlier in a television interview that he wanted his family back together and worried about how much time his father had left. Now, 4 years of frozen contact end in one private afternoon in the English countryside. But reconciliation does not spread evenly through a family. William, Prince of Wales, is not at Highgrove that day. According to reporting on the visit, the two brothers have not spoken directly since their grandmother's funeral in September 2022. George, Charlotte and Louis have effectively no relationship with their cousins in California. One door opens, another stays shut in the same house on the same day. This is the part royal coverage rarely sits with long enough. Every person in this family carries the same last name and almost none of the same private experience of it. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor grew up with access to the throne and lost nearly everything attached to his name. Harry grew up a spare, resented the role and left it entirely. William grew up as the plan itself, with no version of his future that did not involve a crown. Edward grew up somewhere quieter than all three, expected to serve, never expected to shine. Being born into this family does not remove ordinary human strain. It magnifies it, under lighting no private family ever has to stand under. A missed birthday becomes a headline. A private disagreement becomes a 4-year rift covered by news outlets on 2 continents. Edward's version of that pressure looks almost boring by comparison. 27 years married to the same woman. 2 children, Lady Louise and James, kept largely out of tabloid pursuit by their own choice. No scandal with a name attached to it. No exile, no estrangement. No headline requiring a palace statement to contain the damage. Boring in this family might be the rarest achievement of all. And the reason it matters goes beyond one quiet household. It goes to what King Charles needs standing beside him, while his own house keeps testing exactly how much it can survive. Prince William sits under an oak tree near his Windsor home in early October 2025, alone, recording a short video on his phone for an audience of millions he will never see. I sat under this oak tree 5 years ago, soon after we launched the Earthshot Prize, he says. Back then, he goes on, his son George was 7, Charlotte was 5, Louis was 2, and 2030, the year he built his entire environmental project around, felt impossibly far away. Now, halfway through that decade, with George 12, Charlotte 10 and Louis 7, the future he is planning for has stopped being abstract. It has a face at his dinner table. This is not a coincidence, and it is not just a father talking about his kids. William is the Prince of Wales, heir to the British throne, and every project he builds is also a rehearsal for the kind of king he intends to be. The Earthshot Prize, launched in 2020 with £50 million committed over 10 years, is due to hold its 2026 ceremony in Mumbai in November, his first time bringing the award to South Asia, chasing a young, fast-growing Commonwealth population he sees as the next generation of problem solvers. None of this happens in isolation from the rest of the family's troubles. William has spent large parts of the past 2 years managing his own household through his wife's cancer treatment, while his father battled his own diagnosis at the same time. 2 medical crises inside the 2 most senior working households in the monarchy, running in parallel. Catherine, Princess of Wales, has since returned to a full diary of public duties, but the months she spent away taught the institution something no strategy memo could. Even the most photographed family in Britain can vanish from view overnight.
Very eloquently and visually sold both themselves and their topics so accurately, and I hope I don't need to encourage you to support further.
And the public still expects the palace to function without them. Royal commentators have suggested that this stretch reshaped how William thinks about the institution he will eventually run. Leaner, more careful about which relatives it depends on, less willing to assume any one person's health or availability. William cannot personally attend every hospital opening, every regimental parade, every overseas trip a full calendar demands. Someone still has to be there when he cannot. That is where Edward's steady, unglamorous presence stops being a footnote and starts becoming infrastructure. Every engagement Edward quietly covers today is one less gap William will inherit tomorrow. One more habit already built into the system before William ever picks up the full weight of the crown. The institution is not just deciding who represents it today, it is deciding, engagement by engagement, what kind of monarchy survives long enough for George to inherit it. Thames Valley Police confirm an arrest on the evening of February 19, 2026, and the name attached to it stops the British press mid-sentence. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, formerly Prince Andrew, held on suspicion of misconduct in public office. It is, by any measure, an unprecedented moment for the modern monarchy. A man once 8th in line to the throne, once the Queen's favourite son by his own family's account, now processed like any other suspect under investigation. King Charles III does not appear publicly that day. Buckingham Palace issues no statement defending him. The silence itself says as much as any press release could. This did not arrive without warning. The Jeffrey Epstein connection had followed Andrew for years before it finally cost him everything. His military affiliations first in 2022, then his titles, his home at Royal Lodge, and finally, this year, his freedom of movement. Each cut came separately, months or years apart, as if the institution were testing how much it could remove before the public stopped paying attention. It never did. Each new headline pulled the story back to the surface, and each return cost the wider family more of the goodwill it depends on to function. Compare that to how the family handled a different kind of departure 5 years earlier. When Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties in January 2020, there was no arrest, no formal stripping of styles, no eviction notice. There was a joint statement, careful language about stepping back rather than leaving, and years of managed distance instead of a single sharp break. They kept their titles. They kept, eventually, a path back to the family, one that led to a reunion at Highgrove this very July. 2 crises, 2 entirely different responses. One member protected through distance and eventual repair.
another cut off entirely through public punishment with no path back offered at all. Royal commentators have long debated why the family treats its controversies so differently, whether it comes down to the nature of each scandal, the severity of the allegations, or simply which version of damage control looked survivable at the time. What is not in dispute is the pattern this leaves behind. Every crisis forces the institution to reveal, in real time, what it actually values enough to protect. Protection or punishment, tradition or change. The monarchy has answered that question differently almost every single time it has been asked, and the answer it lands on says more about its priorities than any statement ever printed under a palace letterhead. That inconsistency is not a flaw hiding at the edges of this story. It might be the entire story.
My mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary that any right-minded thinking parent should believe that it would have been an alternative.
And it leads straight to the question that has followed every royal generation before this one. Picture the reception hall in Edinburgh one more time, months before any of this. Edward and Sophie shaking hands with volunteers who spent the year helping Ukrainian refugees resettle. No camera crew chasing them, no headline waiting on the other side of the door. That image, small and unremarkable on its own, is the entire story this series has been building toward. Not the illness, not the arrest, not the reunion at Highgrove or the empty chair in Rome. Those were the moments that made headlines. Edward's contribution was never designed to make headlines at all. Strip away the individual events and a single pattern remains underneath all of them. King Charles III spent his first years on the throne managing a monarchy under simultaneous pressure. His own cancer diagnosis, his daughter-in-law's cancer diagnosis, his brother's public disgrace and arrest, his estranged son's long journey back toward the family, and his continued estrangement from his other son. Any one of those crises could have dominated a reign. Together, they very nearly did. What kept the institution functioning through all of it was not a single dramatic decision. It was the accumulation of small, repeated choices to lean on the one working royal least likely to generate a crisis of his own. A Councillor of State provision updated quietly in 2022. A title revived on a birthday in 2023. A seat filled in St. Peter's Square in 2025. None of it announced as strategy. All of it functioning as strategy anyway. Royal commentators remain divided on how to read it. Some see simple continuity, a family doing what families do, leaning on whoever is available when others cannot show up. Others see something closer to institutional instinct, a monarchy that has survived for over 1,000 years precisely because it knows, almost by reflex, which of its members to protect and which to quietly promote when the ground shifts beneath it. Both readings can be true at once. That is usually how institutions actually work, whatever their official version of events claims. Was this ever a deliberate move by King Charles III, mapped out the way a chess player studies 3 moves ahead? Or was it simply what happens when a family under pressure keeps reaching for whoever is standing closest and steadiest? The public record does not settle that question, and it may never fully settle it. What the record does show is this. While the world watched every scandal, every diagnosis, every reunion and every rift, one brother kept showing up in the one place that mattered most, wherever the institution needed someone it could trust not to become the next headline. Strip away every title in this story and one image remains: a man standing quietly in a doorway, waiting to be needed, never asking to be noticed. That is not a small thing inside an institution built on being seen. For centuries, the British monarchy has survived less because of its most famous members and more because of the ones willing to do the unglamorous work standing just behind them. Every kingdom needs a face for the cameras. Every kingdom, if it wants to last, also needs someone who shows up when the cameras are pointed somewhere else entirely. Prince Edward, Duke of Edinburgh, spent most of his life being underestimated. A failed television venture, a quit commando course, a nickname the tabloids never let him forget. None of that disappeared. It simply stopped being the whole story, buried under 3 decades of engagements nobody else wanted and duties nobody else could always cover. The strongest people inside any institution are not always the loudest. Sometimes they are simply the ones still standing in the room, when everyone louder has already left it, been removed from it, or stepped away from it entirely. In the end, this was never only about one prince, one title, or one birthday gift from an older brother. It was about how an ancient institution survives a decade that tested it from every direction at once. Illness, disgrace, estrangement, and reconciliation. All arriving in the same few years, all demanding someone reliable enough to hold the door open while the family found its footing again.
If this kind of story pulls back the curtain on how power actually moves inside institutions that never explain themselves, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this channel is only getting started on the royal family's quietest power players. Drop your own take in the comments below. The palace may stay silent, but you don't have to.